Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ask Dr. Nick. My name is Dr. Nick Schmidlkoffer, and I work for the Neurologic Wellness Institute here in downtown Chicago. And today's topic is, what are the benefits of a ketogenic diet? This is a huge topic, and I love this topic because I've been a big proponent of the ketogenic diet for the last about 5 years now. And I do it every year pretty strictly, but then I also eat relatively more on a ketogenic state, as in I have a higher fat to carbohydrate ratio in my diet. And the reason why this is so important is because the ketogenic diet can benefit so many people in their health, including neurological issues, whether that be neurodegeneration, whether that be neurodevelopmental disorders, maybe autism or ADHD, whether that would be traumatic brain injury. I've done a topic, or an Ask Dr. Nick topic, on what to do after a concussion, and that includes a ketogenic-based diet for 7 to 10 days after a concussion. And then also psychiatric disorders like anxiety, depression, other motor disorders or neuromuscular issues. So it's a very big topic. It's a topic that I really enjoy. I have a lot of papers to show. I've actually done a podcast with Dr. Joseph Kappas, who is my coworker here downtown, and I'm sure you can see that as well. But we weren't able to put a lot of the articles and the research, so I wanted to kind of go through that as well. So again, big topic. First, what is a ketogenic diet? Ketogenic diet was originally thought of, brought up in the early 1900s for a treatment of refractory epilepsy. So it was for children that had epilepsy or have epilepsy, and they were not able to be treated with a normal dose of medication or with multiple trials of medicines. And it worked. And the reason why it worked is because it is more efficient fuel source for the brain, kind of decreases the brain waves that can be a little bit too much or excitotoxic in epilepsy. And so that's where it kind of started. And then lately, in the last 10, 15, even 20 years, it's been a hot topic for diet and weight loss. And so we're not going to talk too much about weight loss, but it is a great way to lose weight. But I want to talk more about the neuroprotective effects. And a lot of that is just based on increasing ketosis. So ketogenic diet is designed to get into a nutritional ketosis state. And that is increasing ketones in the body to a certain level. And we'll talk about those in a sec. And with the ketogenic diet, you decrease glucose. You decrease the amount of glucose that is coming in, and it actually helps stabilize your blood glucose. We know that we need glucose for many of the cells in our body. Like our red blood cells can only use glucose. And our brain is generally going to use glucose if it's there, but that doesn't mean it's the most efficient fuel source for it. Instead, ketone bodies, especially beta-hydroxybutyrate, which we'll talk about, it's BHB, is a more efficient fuel source for the brain. And it also is a cool signaling molecule that changes gene expression. So if with the ketogenic diet, the idea is to increase a lot of fats. So you should be a strict ketogenic diet is going to have about 75% of your calories coming from fats. And those are any kind of fats, saturated fats, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated. Ideally, we stay more in the saturated and monounsaturated area. Then it's about 20% of calories coming from protein and 5% from carbs. And it's really likely that you're trying to stay below 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrates while on the diet. Now that's, again, a strict ketogenic diet that might be used for a medical issue, whether you have a neurodegenerative disease or you have a brain injury. And it's good to then be strict for a certain amount of time. But then what that does is it creates flexibility, creates metabolic flexibility, so that Now, if you decide to have a little bit more carbs in your diet, you can use both carbs or glucose and ketone bodies or fats for energy. And this metabolic flexibility is so important in longevity and health because we shouldn't be eating every second of the day. And a lot of times when we are using only glucose for fuel, we need to do that. And if we have a time where maybe we get into like an intermittent fasting, I've done another topic on that. Intermittent fasting, what it does is you don't eat for maybe 18 hours during the day. And at that point, your body should be using its own fats to supply energy for your brain, your heart, and your muscles. So this metabolic flexibility is super important for health. So you're not always in this like anabolic state of growth. Rather, you kind of move around and you create this ability to get rid of waste when you're in a more efficient, catabolic or less anabolic state. So let's get right into the papers. Like I said, this might be a little bit longer one. I really like this topic, and I hope I can cover everything that I would like to. So here we go. The first one is from 2014, and it's ketone bodies as signaling metabolites. And so besides ketone bodies being used for fuel, we also use them as metabolites that can signal changes in gene expression. And so one thing we'll talk about right away is just that beta-hydroxybutyrate can inhibit histone deacetylases. So this is just something that allows us to change our genes. Okay, we'll just go with that. But I want to talk about a few of these pictures. Okay, sorry, it's page 22. Okay, so this first one, we're looking at in the liver. Now let's start here. So fatty acids. Fatty acids are in our blood, whether that be from our own fat or from the fats that we're eating. And those fatty acids can be used by the muscles, can be used by the heart. Our heart actually uses fatty acids more than any other type of fuel. But our brain cannot use fatty acids because they cannot get through the blood-brain barrier. And so we need to make ketone bodies in order to then supply the brain with ketones rather than glucose when we're on a ketogenic diet. So fatty acids go into the liver and they undergo a few metabolic steps that then cause beta-hydroxybutyrate to come out. And the liver can't use beta-hydroxybutyrate as fuel. And so that beta-hydroxybutyrate goes into the blood and then goes into these extrahepatic or non-liver tissues, including the brain. And then that is what's used for fuel. It turns into acetyl-CoA, which is kind of like the most abundant molecule for fuel in our body that enters the citric acid cycle in the mitochondria for fuel. So that's just a basic outline of kind of what happens. This next diagram just shows how beta-hydroxybutyrate is a signaling molecule. We're not going to talk too much about that, except for the fact that, hey, it helps increase longevity pathways. So it may help increase your lifespan. Again, I don't really want to go there. I want to talk more about a few other things. So here again, the effects of beta-hydroxybutyrate signaling. Does histone hypoacetylation, affects these genes, affects resistance to oxidative stress, so it helps decrease stress or oxidation. And all this happens on receptors outside the cell, receptors in the mitochondria, and then also receptors within the nucleus or the DNA of the cell. And so what's pretty cool about this is as a signaling molecule, it can help do many things. Here's another one, reduce lipolysis. So basically we're not making fat, we're not storing fat. Lower metabolic rate. So we don't really want a high metabolism. We want to conserve our energy in this case. And then reduced sympathetic tone, so decreased stress and sympathetic tone in that state. And then lastly, so we talked about that histone deacetylation inhibition. And so this is what it basically does. It affects multiple genes, helps with DNA repair, cell cycle regulation, FOXO gene, autophagy, and all of these help to increase stress resistance. Has anti-neoplastic or anti-cancer properties, help with longevity, and helps with our metabolic health, and that's that metabolic flexibility. So that's one paper. I think that was the last. Yep. Okay. Next paper I want to talk about is just real quick. We're going to show how beta-hydroxybutyrate is a signaling molecule that decreases an inflammasome. So an inflammasome, this NLRP3, increases inflammation in our body. And so it inhibits that. And this article showed that it can have potentially antidepressant and anti-inflammatory effects in rats by decreasing this inflammasome activity. So here, beta-hydroxybutyrate exerts antidepressant-like effects, possibly by inhibiting the NLRP3-induced neuroinflammation in the hippocampus, which is our memory center. And that beta-hydroxybutyrate may be a novel candidate for treatment of stress-related mood disorders like anxiety and depression. And so let's go down to their conclusion. Kind of the same thing. It has antidepressant-like effects in this rat model. It decreases inflammatory cytokines and many things like that. So again, this was an animal study, but it just shows that beta-hydroxybutyrate can help possibly with depression by decreasing inflammation. Okay, another one. So beta-hydroxybutyrate, or 3-hydroxybutyrate, it's the same thing, regulates energy metabolism and induces BDNF expression in our cerebral cortex. So BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and that's what helps us with neuroplasticity, with making more neurons. And so we can go down here and we can see, blow this one up a little bit more. So fasting and exercise. So we know fasting helps increase ketone bodies. Exercise helps do it. And of course, a ketogenic diet does as well. Causes glycogen depletion. It causes fatty acids to get converted into beta-hydroxybutyrate in the liver cell. Beta-hydroxybutyrate will then go into the neuron here, and it goes to the mitochondria. And what it does, it helps decrease reactive oxygen species. It actually causes a slight increase initially, and that slight increase is what causes this activation of brain-derived neurotrophic factor within the nucleus. So the gene is actually transcribed, and then we increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor that helps with stress resistance, synaptic plasticity. And then later on, it then helps with decreasing reactive oxygen species. So that's just another article. So right now we have helping with neuroprotection and synaptic plasticity, and we also help being a more efficient fuel source for the brain. This article, so this one is from Frontiers, which is a really good journal. It's from January 2018. And it's how can the ketogenic diet improve motor function? We know that our brain is tightly connected to motor function. They talked about neuroprotective effects of polyunsaturated fatty acids and ketone bodies. It involves pleiotropic mechanisms, basically meaning that it involves multiple things going on, such as modulating neuronal membrane excitability, so decreasing that excitability, making it more efficient, decreased inflammation, decreasing reactive oxygen species, and how this can help with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, and spinal cord injury. And so let's go down to this picture. Okay, so we have this picture. So what a ketogenic diet does. We know it decreases glucose. Glucose is a quick fuel source for the brain and for cells, but what happens is glucose goes through glycolysis here. And glycolysis will lead to pyruvate, which then leads to lactate. Lactate becomes lactic acid, and that's what kind of builds up in muscles and joints after we have a tough exercise. We have that like DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness. That lactic acid can be damaging to our cells. And so this is why glucose is not as efficient, and it can cause inflammation if we're using glucose too much. And so instead, a ketogenic diet also elevates fatty acids. And these fatty acids are then going to go into, right here, you're going to go into the mitochondria in a hepatocyte or an astrocyte. And then it gets converted in the hepatocyte or astrocyte. Astrocytes are a cell within the brain, a supporting cell. And it creates beta-hydroxybutyrate, another ketone body, acetoacetate. And then these are what fuels the mitochondria or the neuron, the motor neuron. And so then therefore beta-hydroxybutyrate can create right here ATP through multiple different chemical reactions within the mitochondria. Okay, so we know that fatty acids, the ketone bodies, it's a good efficient fuel source. We don't create this lactic acid when we use beta-hydroxybutyrate. At the same time, this combination of elevated fatty acids, reduced glucose, increases uncoupling proteins, which then decrease reactive oxygen species. So by decreasing oxidative stress, we improve function of our mitochondria and our cells. That also leads to mitochondrial biogenesis. So we make more mitochondria to make more energy. This increases ATP right here, leads to more energy reserves. The ketosis leads to increased vesicular glutamate transporters, vesicular glutamate transporters. What that does is it decreases glutamate toxicity, which is what I mentioned in the beginning about epilepsy. When you have too much glutamate around, it can cause cells to fire when they shouldn't be firing, and that can lead to a lot of electrical activity that we just don't want. And so then therefore this stabilizes synaptic function, stabilizes membranes, causes increase in GABA, which is the opposite of glutamate, to kind of bring down that activity, settle it, kind of calm people down. And then overall, this leads to neuroprotection. So I just really like this graphic. I thought it was a good summary of a lot of things. So then let's go to some other benefits of the ketogenic diet. So ketogenic diet in neuromuscular and neurodegenerative diseases. So this is an article from 2014 that just shows the possibility that it can be useful for ALS, for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's disease, for other mitochondrial issues. And so it just has a good description of all of those. Another article. Okay, so the therapeutic potential of exogenous ketone supplementation induced ketosis and the treatment of psychiatric disorders. So we haven't talked too much about exogenous ketones, but that's just like taking ketones to then increase nutritional ketosis. It's not my best way, and it's very expensive or costly, but this just has a good review on how ketosis can help with psychiatric disorders. This article is from 2019, so it's relatively new. And let's just go down to the graphic of all the ways. Oh, here are all the psychiatric disorders they talked about: Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, glucose transporter deficiencies, ALS, cancer, epilepsy, schizophrenia, anxiety, depression, and autism. Here it is. Okay, we've talked about this a lot, so I just want to talk about this one right here. And so we know that beta-hydroxybutyrate, when we increase it, we increase a lot of things. We increase ATP, we decrease glycolysis, we increase our GABA, that's that inhibitory neurotransmitter. We decrease glutamate, just talked about that. We increase free fatty acid receptors, we decrease the inflammasome, decrease inflammation. We increase the hydroxycarboxylic acid receptor. All that means is that we're getting more beta-hydroxybutyrate into the cell. We increase uncoupling proteins, which helps to decrease oxidative stress. And we decrease histone deacetylase, that affects the antioxidant enzyme activity. And so all of these things lead to specific factors like decreased cell death, decreased oxidative stress, increased adenosine levels, okay, all these things that then lead to enhancement of brain energy, promotion of repolarization of neuronal membranes. That means that after a cell fires, it has to repolarize in order to be able to fire again. Otherwise, it's just kind of there and it's not able to do anything. That's similar to this part. It modulates neurotransmitter release so we can be more efficient. Modulates neurotransmitter balance, that's the glutamate and the GABA. Decreases inflammatory processes, which is huge, and has neuroprotective effects. All of these things can help with these psychiatric disorders. So again, I just like this picture. It's just so much more evidence of ketogenic diets helping with neuroprotection and brain issues. The last one is, a lot of people say, what happens to your gut microbiome? Like, don't you need to be eating a ton of fruit and vegetables in order to support your gut microbiome? And when you're on the ketogenic diet, a lot of times the beta-hydroxybutyrate can actually feed your gut microbiome. And even though your gut microbiome changes a little bit into what this article calls the keto microbiota, it is beneficial for the overall response that we get with a high-fat, low-carb diet. And so that's what this is basically talking about. And so let's go down to here. And basically it says that you need both the ketogenic diet and the keto microbiota is what then helps with the benefits, versus dysbiosis, when you do not have a good microbiome, is what then leads to further problems. Lastly, we have one more. And so we already talked about what the ketogenic diet does when it comes to our metabolism and that metabolic flexibility. Talked a little bit about the epigenetic changes, but then here talks about how it's so important that the keto microbiome, the richness and diversity of the microbiome that occurs on a ketogenic diet, is also affecting these ketotherapeutic effects that we see with epilepsy, with neurodegeneration, and with other neurological disorders. So I know that was a lot, but let's summarize a little bit. Okay, so the ketogenic diet can be beneficial for many diseases, and especially for neuroprotection. It can be beneficial for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's, for neurodevelopmental issues like ADHD, autism, helpful after traumatic brain injury, or even long-term chronic traumatic brain injury. It can be helpful for anxiety and depression, other psychological disorders. And we didn't talk about it, but of course, weight loss and diabetes and prediabetes. And so how do you start a ketogenic diet? The number one thing you need to do is start tracking your calories and tracking where you actually get your food from. Just start being more aware, because you may not want to go right from eating 200 carbohydrates a day to then eating less than 20. That can really put a stressor on your body. And so you may take a few weeks just to slowly lower your carbohydrates, decrease a lot of your processed carbs like breads and pastas and cookies and sweets. And then once you get to the point where you're eating less carbohydrates, maybe getting to that 20 to 30, you're eating more fats, you're eating fattier meats, you're eating avocados and avocado oil, you're eating nuts and seeds that have higher amounts of fat. And at the same time, you're going to have that protein at a general level, right? 20%, 25% of your calories coming from protein. And now what you want to do is you want to avoid the keto flu, which is basically just your body not understanding, not being able to switch from eating just, or from being fueled on just glucose to now being fueled on ketone bodies and more fats. And this may take like 3 to 5 days, and then really like 7 to 14 to really be optimal, but 3 to 5 days where you just don't feel as good. You may have a headache, you may feel fatigued, you may have lethargy. And so one thing to do is to make sure that you're getting enough salt, sodium, and maybe other electrolytes like magnesium and potassium, whether you're taking that in an electrolyte supplement or just from your food, or you're just salting your foods. And also drinking a ton of water. What happens is ketones, if they're not being used by the body initially because your body's not used to it, then you're just going to pee them out. And when you pee them out, you also pee out water. So you become very dehydrated. And this dehydration is what causes these symptoms. So you want to make sure that you're absorbing and reabsorbing your water. That's why you increase your salt intake. You shouldn't be afraid to increase it too much. And then you also increase your water intake. And also just exercise. Keep moving around. Exercise can really help decrease those effects of fatigue and headaches. So that's all I got for today. I know it was a long one. I think the ketogenic diet is great. And I think that if you want any other more information, do your research. Or you can also look at Dr. Joseph Koppis's podcast on our site, the Neurologic Wellness Podcast. And please just take a look and try it out. I think everybody should try it. And even though you may not do it your whole life, doing it 1 month out of the year is a great metabolic reset, so you can improve your metabolic flexibility. So again, thank you. Have a good day and stay healthy.